I never thought I'd be the guy writing this, but life has a funny way of blindsiding you. My name's Mike, and I've been married to Jessica for 8 years. We were the kind of couple people envied, at least that's what everyone told us. I thought we had it all. A nice house, stable jobs, and plans to start a family soon. But looking back, I can't believe how blind I was to the cracks forming in our relationship. Started about 6 months ago. Jessica began staying late at work more often, always with some excuse about deadlines or coworker emergencies. First, I believed her. Why wouldn't I? She was my wife, my partner, the person I trusted most in the world. But then little things started piling up. The constant texting, her laughing at her phone more than usual, and the sudden increase in effort she was putting into her appearance. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, though. I convinced myself it was all in my head. Maybe she was just stressed or trying to spice things up for me. I even surprised her with a romantic dinner one night, but she barely touched her food and said she wasn't feeling well. That night, she turned away from me in bed, and I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was very wrong. At that point, I should have trusted my gut, but I didn't. I told myself I was overthinking things. Turns out I wasn't. I had no idea the storm that was about to hit my life. It all started with a fluke, a complete accident that set everything in motion. Jessica and I were having dinner one Friday night, and she was glued to her phone as usual, laughing at some work group chat messages. I tried not to be the jealous type, so I asked about it casually. She just rolled her eyes and said, "Oh, Mike, you wouldn't get it. It's just stupid office stuff." Then she turned her phone face down on the table. The next day, I went to grab a coffee before work and bumped into Eric at the cafe near my office. He was dressed sharper than usual, way too sharp for a Saturday morning. He looked startled when he saw me, almost like I'd caught him doing something he shouldn't. I asked him what he was up to, and he stammered something about meeting a client. It didn't sit right with me. Eric was my best friend. We told each other everything. But that morning, he couldn't even look me in the eye. Then, Jessica started getting even more distant. She was working late almost every other night, but her stories didn't add up. One time, I called her office to ask what she wanted for dinner, and her coworker said she'd left hours earlier. When I asked her about it, she got defensive. "Why are you keeping tabs on me?" she snapped, storming off before I could get a word in. The red flags were everywhere, but I didn't have proof, just a gut feeling that something was seriously wrong. Then came the turning point, an email. While cleaning up our shared computer one evening, I stumbled across an old draft email Jessica had written but never sent. It was addressed to Eric, and while most of it was cryptic, there was one line that hit me like a freight train. "I can't wait for when it's just the two of us and we don't have to sneak around anymore." That was the moment I realized I couldn't ignore it anymore. But instead of confronting her outright, I decided to play it smart. I needed proof, real, undeniable proof. I started watching her closely, noting every excuse, every lie. I even started tracking her car's location with an app she didn't know I'd installed when we first bought it. What I found only made things worse. She wasn't at work half the time she claimed to be. She was at restaurants, bars, and once, of all places, a hotel. Still, I hadn't caught her in the act. I didn't want to jump to conclusions and risk accusing her without solid evidence. But the pieces were falling into place. I could feel it in my gut. Something was going to happen soon, and I had to be ready. At this point, I knew Jessica was lying, but I needed undeniable proof. If she was going to betray me, I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of slipping away unnoticed. I decided to keep my suspicions to myself and wait for the right moment. The opportunity came when Jessica casually mentioned a party Eric was hosting. "It's just for work friends," she said, twirling her hair like she always did when she was deflecting. "You wouldn't know anyone there, and I'll probably just pop in for an hour." I nodded, playing along, but my mind was racing. If Eric was hosting and Jessica was going without me, then this was my chance to see exactly what was going on. Over the next few days, I quietly gathered everything I needed. I told Jessica I had to work late that night and wouldn't be home until after midnight. She didn't even flinch, just nodded and kissed me on the cheek like everything was normal. That night, I left the house as planned, but instead of going to work, I parked a few blocks away from Eric's house and waited. His neighborhood was quiet, the kind where everyone minds their own business. The lights in his house were dim, except for the warm glow coming from the living room where the party was in full swing. As I sat there in my car, I started to doubt myself. What if I was wrong? What if this was all in my head, and I was about to ruin my marriage and my longest friendship for nothing? But then, around 9:30, I saw Jessica pull up in her car. She was dressed to the nines, wearing a dress I hadn't seen before. She didn't even hesitate, just walked straight up to Eric's door, laughing as he greeted her with open arms. I clenched the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I wanted to storm in right then and there, but something held me back. If this was what I thought it was, I needed more than just a hunch. I waited about 30 minutes before sneaking around to the backyard. Eric's house had a big patio with sliding glass doors, and from there, I could see into the living room. The party was in full swing with people drinking, laughing, and dancing. Jessica was right in the middle of it, sitting on the couch next to Eric. At first, it seemed innocent, just two friends hanging out. But then I saw the way they leaned in close, the way she touched his arm and laughed a little too hard at his jokes. It wasn't proof of anything, but it was enough to make my blood boil. I knew I couldn't act yet. I needed to bide my time and wait for them to slip up. I wasn't going to let them wiggle out of this with excuses or half-truths. I stayed hidden in the shadows, watching and waiting, my heart pounding with every passing minute. I crouched low in the shadows of Eric's backyard, hidden just beyond the patio lights. The party was loud enough to mask any noise I might make, but I still moved carefully, inching closer to the glass doors for a better view. Jessica was laughing, leaning into Eric like they shared some inside joke that no one else was privy to. I tried to steady my breathing, but my chest felt like it was going to explode. I wasn't just angry, I was humiliated. My wife, the woman I had trusted with everything, was openly flirting with my best friend in front of a crowd of people. It felt like a bad dream, but I couldn't wake up. Then, something unexpected happened. A man I didn't recognize, a tall guy in a dark suit, approached Jessica. They exchanged a few words, and she laughed again, touching his shoulder. Eric didn't seem to care. He just sipped his drink and watched them like he was in on some joke I didn't understand. It didn't make sense. Was this guy in on it too? Was this all part of some twisted game they were playing? The mystery deepened when I noticed Jessica slipping something into the man's hand. A small piece of paper folded tightly. He nodded, pocketed it, and walked off toward the kitchen. Jessica turned back to Eric, who smirked and whispered something in her ear. She grinned, and they both burst out laughing. I was stunned. Was this about the affair? Or was something else going on? My mind raced with possibilities. For a moment, I even wondered if they were involved in something criminal. It didn't feel like just a casual fling anymore. It felt orchestrated, deliberate. I needed to get closer. Carefully, I crept around the side of the house, finding an open window near the kitchen. The man in the suit was there, talking to someone else, a woman in a red dress. I couldn't make out everything they were saying, but I caught snippets. Tonight, after he leaves, keep it quiet. She'll handle him. My stomach churned. Who's he? Are they talking about me? I backed away, my mind spinning. This wasn't just about Jessica cheating anymore. There was something bigger happening here, and I was smack in the middle of it without even knowing. I didn't leave, though. Couldn't. Not until I had answers. I stayed hidden, my heart pounding in my chest. The pieces of this twisted puzzle weren't adding up, and the more I saw, the more confused and angry I became. Who was this man in the suit? What was in that note Jessica had slipped him? And why did everything feel like a coordinated effort to keep me in the dark? As I circled back toward the patio, I spotted Eric stepping outside with Jessica. She was holding a glass of wine, her laugh ringing out louder than necessary. They stood close, whispering, their heads almost touching. I crept closer, trying to catch their words. "Don't worry," Eric said, his voice low but smug. "He won't find out. He's too clueless to even think about it." Jessica rolled her eyes and smirked. Oh, please. Mike's so busy playing the doting husband he doesn't even notice half the things I do. I could probably tell him straight to his face, and he'd still believe me. I gritted my teeth, gripping the edge of the fence for support. I felt a surge of anger unlike anything I'd ever experienced. My best friend and my wife were openly mocking me, treating me like I was some kind of fool. Then Jessica added, "Besides, it's not like he's man enough to do anything about it even if he found out." She tilted her head back and laughed, the sound slicing through me like a knife. Eric chuckled, leaning against the railing. "Well, let's just keep it simple tonight. We don't need any drama ruining the fun." Jessica nodded, her expression suddenly serious. "Right? I'll keep him distracted. You just make sure everything else is taken care of." That was it. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know what everything else meant. Was this just about their affair? Or was there something even more sinister happening? Just as they turned to go back inside, something unexpected happened. A guest, a woman I didn't recognize, stumbled out onto the patio, clearly drunk. She bumped into Jessica, spilling wine down the front of her dress. "Oh my God, seriously?" Jessica snapped, glaring at the woman. The guest apologized profusely, but Jessica waved her off, muttering under her breath. Eric, meanwhile, grabbed a towel and tried to calm her down, but she shoved him away. "I'm going to clean up," she hissed, storming back into the house. This was my chance. While Eric stayed behind to deal with the guest, I slipped toward the side door, following Jessica inside. She headed straight for the bathroom, leaving her phone unattended on the kitchen counter. I knew it was risky, but I didn't care anymore. I grabbed it and quickly unlocked it, scrolling through her messages. That's when I found the thread that made my stomach drop. It wasn't just Eric. There were messages from the man in the suit and even a few other names I didn't recognize. The conversations were cryptic, but the tone was unmistakable. Jessica was involved in something far bigger than just an affair. One message from the man in the suit read, "Make sure everything's ready tonight. He'll be out of the picture soon." Another from Eric said, "After tonight, we won't have to worry about him anymore." My hands were shaking as I put the phone back down and stepped away. Whatever this was, it wasn't just about cheating. It felt like I was walking into a trap, and I had no idea how deep it went. But I wasn't leaving. Not yet. I needed to see this through, no matter the cost. I waited in the shadows of the hallway, my heart racing. Jessica emerged from the bathroom, muttering something under her breath about stupid drunk idiots. She didn't notice me as she grabbed her phone off the counter and made her way back toward the party. I followed her at a distance, careful not to be seen. She returned to the living room, where the party was still in full swing. Eric was waiting for her, drink in hand, his smirk as infuriating as ever. She leaned into him, whispering something I couldn't hear, and he nodded before leading her toward the back of the house. They slipped through a door, and I knew I had to follow. My blood was boiling, but I forced myself to stay quiet, careful. I crept down the hallway and peeked through a crack in the door they had left slightly ajar. What I saw confirmed everything, and shattered me all at once. Jessica and Eric were alone in a dimly lit room, laughing softly as she wrapped her arms around his neck. She was pressed close to him, her tone flirty and unapologetic. "You really think he's that stupid?" Jessica asked, her voice dripping with mockery. Eric chuckled, pulling her closer. "Mike? Please. The guy's so oblivious it's almost sad. He's probably at work right now, completely clueless about what we're doing." Jessica threw her head back and laughed. "You're right. I mean, what can he do about it anyway? Nothing. He's too spineless to even stand up for himself." My hands clenched into fists as I fought the urge to burst into the room. I wanted to scream, to yell, to throw Eric into the wall and demand answers. But I held back. I needed more than just words. I needed to see the extent of their betrayal with my own eyes. Then Jessica said something that sent a chill down my spine. "Once tonight is over, it's done. He'll be out of the picture for good." Eric smirked. "You're sure about that?" You know we can't afford any loose ends. Jessica waved her hand dismissively. Trust me, Mike won't see it coming. He's too naive to realize what's happening until it's too late. My breath caught. This wasn't just about an affair anymore. They were planning something bigger, something that involved getting rid of me. Suddenly, Jessica leaned in, her lips brushing against Eric's ear. Let's go back to the party before people start wondering where we are. We'll finish this later. I barely had time to back away before they opened the door and walked out, laughing like nothing had happened. I stayed hidden, my mind racing. This wasn't just betrayal. This was a calculated, premeditated plan, and I had stumbled right into the middle of it. But if they thought I was going to roll over and let this happen, they were dead wrong. I stayed in the shadows, my mind a whirlwind of anger and disbelief. Jessica and Eric weren't just betraying me. They were plotting to erase me from their lives completely. Whether that meant a divorce, financial sabotage, or something worse, I couldn't be sure. But I wasn't going to wait around to find out. As the party roared on, I slipped out the side door, heading back to my car. My emotions were on overdrive, but I knew one thing for certain. If they thought they could outsmart me, they had underestimated the wrong man. I drove home, formulating my plan. Over the next 2 days, I gathered everything I needed. I installed hidden cameras in the house, reviewed our financial records, and even spoke to a lawyer. It turns out, Jessica had been quietly funneling money out of our joint account into a separate one under her name. That was strike one. Strike two came when I went through Eric's social media. He wasn't as careful as Jessica. His posts were full of clues about their relationship. Photos from places Jessica had claimed were work trips, inside jokes that made no sense to anyone but them, and even a few deleted posts I recovered through an archive tool. But strike three, the nail in their coffin, was finding out about the insurance policy Jessica had taken out on me. She had convinced me months ago to sign some papers, just in case anything happened. And like an idiot, I didn't read the fine print. The policy was heavily in her favor, to the point that if something happened to me, she'd walk away with a fortune. They weren't just betraying me, they were planning to profit off me. That's when I decided I wasn't just going to expose them. I was going to make sure they regretted every second of their deceit. The first part of my plan was to set the stage. I made it seem like I was oblivious, going about my days as usual. I even apologized to Jessica for acting distant, which she ate up like the narcissist she was. Meanwhile, I coordinated with a few trusted friends to help me. One was a private investigator, someone I'd helped out years ago who owed me a favor. He dug deeper into Eric and Jessica's activities, confirming my suspicions and giving me even more evidence. The second part of my plan was to turn the tables on them at their next meetup. Jessica had mentioned in passing that Eric was hosting another party the following weekend, this time a smaller, more intimate gathering. She assumed I'd be working late again. Little did she know I was already 2 steps ahead. The night of Eric's next party arrived, and I made sure Jessica thought everything was business as usual. I kissed her goodbye as she left the house, telling her I'd be home late from another long night at work. She smiled sweetly, none the wiser, and drove off without a second thought. What she didn't know was that I was already ahead of her. I arrived at Eric's house before she did, slipping in through the back door while Eric was busy setting up. I knew the layout of his place like the back of my hand, so it wasn't hard to find a hiding spot with a clear view of the living room. As the night went on, guests trickled in, most of them people I didn't recognize. Then Jessica arrived, dressed to kill in a sleek black dress, her smile radiating confidence. She greeted Eric with a hug that lasted a little too long, and I had to clench my fists to keep from storming out of my hiding spot right then and there. But I waited. I needed the perfect moment. About an hour into the party, the atmosphere started to shift. People began leaving, one by one, until only a handful of guests remained. Jessica and Eric were sitting together on the couch, laughing and drinking like they didn't have a care in the world. That's when Eric made his move. He leaned in close, whispering something in Jessica's ear that made her laugh and slap his arm playfully. Then, without warning, he kissed her. I felt my stomach drop, but I didn't move. Not yet. I wanted them to dig their own graves. Jessica pulled back, smirking. "You're getting bold," she said, her tone dripping with arrogance. Eric shrugged. "Why not? It's not like Mike's ever going to find out. And even if he does, what's he going to do about it?" That was my cue. I stepped out of the shadows, clapping slowly. The sound echoed through the room, and both of their heads snapped toward me. Jessica's face turned ghostly pale, while Eric froze like a deer in headlights. "Well, isn't this cozy?" I said, my voice calm despite the rage bubbling underneath. Jessica stammered, "Mike, what are you doing here?" "What am I doing here?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Oh, just enjoying the little show you two have been putting on. You know, the one you thought I'd never find out about." Eric stood up, trying to play it cool. "Look, man, this isn't what it looks like. Don't—" I cut him off, pointing a finger at him. "You don't get to speak. Not after everything I've seen." I pulled out my phone, waving it in the air. "Because guess what, Eric? I've got it all. The texts, the emails, the photos. And Jessica, don't think I forgot about that little insurance policy you so kindly set up. You were really planning to cash in, weren't you?" Jessica's eyes widened, and she took a step back. "Mike, I can explain." "Explain what?" I snapped. "Explain how you've been lying to my face for months? Or how you and Eric have been laughing behind my back, planning God knows what to get rid of me?" The room was dead silent, except for the sound of Jessica's shallow breathing. I could see the gears turning in her head as she tried to come up with an excuse, but there was nothing she could say to fix this. "I'll do whatever I want with whoever I want," she finally blurted, her voice shrill. "You're not some victim, Mike. You're boring, predictable, and honestly, I deserve better." That was it. The last straw. "You want better?" I said, my voice icy. "Good. Because after tonight, you're going to get exactly what you deserve." I pulled out another phone, one that had been streaming the entire confrontation live to a private group of friends and family. Jessica's jaw dropped as she realized what was happening. "You've been exposed," I said, glaring at both of them. "Everyone knows now. Your lies, your betrayal, it's all out in the open. And trust me, Jessica, when the divorce papers hit your desk, you'll understand just how much you've lost." Eric tried to step forward, but I held up a hand. "Don't even think about it," I warned. "You're nothing to me anymore. Both of you are." With that, I turned and walked out, leaving them to deal with the fallout. Walking out of Eric's house felt like ripping off a bandage that had been clinging to my skin for years. The cool night air hit my face as I stepped into the street, but it did little to calm the storm brewing inside me. I didn't look back, even as I heard Jessica yelling my name, her voice panicked and desperate. She was scrambling now, trying to regain control of a situation that had spiraled completely out of her hands. The ride home was a blur. By the time I got there, I had already blocked Jessica's number and instructed my lawyer to send over the divorce papers first thing in the morning. There would be no second chances, no apologies accepted, no turning back. The fallout was swift and brutal. The live stream I had broadcasted of the confrontation spread quickly among our circle of friends and family. Jessica's carefully curated image as a loving wife shattered in an instant. Her parents, who had always adored me, were furious with her. Friends who had once admired our relationship started cutting her off, one by one. Eric didn't fare much better. Word got out to his coworkers, some of whom were at the party that night, and he was promptly fired from his job. Turns out, his boss didn't appreciate having someone with such questionable morals representing the company. But the biggest blow came when Jessica tried to claim the insurance money. My lawyer had already flagged the policy, and the evidence I provided proved her intentions were anything but innocent. Not only did she lose any chance of profiting off me, but she also faced potential legal consequences for the fraud she had attempted to commit. For weeks, I felt a mix of emotions: anger, sadness, relief, and even guilt. There were moments I questioned whether I'd done the right thing by exposing them so publicly. But then I remembered the sheer audacity of their betrayal, the lies, the manipulation, the arrogance. They didn't deserve my sympathy. Eventually, the dust settled, I sold the house Jessica and I had shared and moved to a new city, far away from the memories of what had happened. Starting over wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Looking back, I realize how much I learned from this experience. Trust is fragile, and once it's broken, it's almost impossible to repair. But more than that, I learned the importance of valuing myself. For years, I had put Jessica's happiness above my own, ignoring the red flags and making excuses for her behavior. Never again. If you're reading this and find yourself in a similar situation, my advice is simple. Trust your instincts, gather your evidence, and don't let anyone make you feel like you're less than you are. Betrayal cuts deep, but it doesn't define you. As for Jessica and Eric, last I heard, their so-called relationship fizzled out after a few months. Karma has a funny way of catching up with people. And me, I'm finally free.